I'm Steve Perry. This is Biblical Anarchy, and today we are taking a look at the creation and flood stories. Are these historical events, or are these mytho-history, or whatever you'd like to call them? I was formerly an atheist, so coming to the Old Testament, as Christians would call it, or Tanakh, or the Torah, right out the gate, you're hit in the face with creation in 7 days, 6 days, seventh day he rested, what have you, and then the flood story. And as I was investigating the New Testament, I thought it was important to learn the culture of the Roman world, and especially Judea or Palestine, as you would call it, and the things that were going around there. So I studied that culture. But when coming to the Torah and Tanakh, I decided to obviously study the culture of the ancient world. The study I'm still involved in, this one's more difficult. You have to rely on many sources to make sure. Basically, historians have to interpret the information that they get through archaeology. And so you kind of have to shop around a little and look at different views and try to develop a consistent view of the culture at that time. But one of the things you're going to notice when looking at the creation story and the flood story is that there are very similar stories from the ancient Near East, Babylon, Samaria, etc. And these similar stories kind of have tie-ins to the biblical stories. What am I talking about here? Well, let's look, if I can turn up my screen here because it's kind of dark. There we go. Let's take a look at this is the Babylonian flood epic, sometimes called Atrahasis. This is the name of the Noah character in this story. And we read that then on the seventh day, Atrahasis released a dove. It flew out and came back, finding no place to perch. Then he reached his hand forth and released a swallow. The swallow flew here and there, then came back home, for there was no promising place it might alight upon. Then he reached his hand forth and released a raven. The raven flew, and seeing the waters were receding, it settled to eat, preen, fluff itself, and did not return. He sent out everything in all directions and sacrificed, setting down the ritual offering on the mountain peak. Interesting. Now, if we compare that to the Noah flood story that we find in the book of Genesis, we see a similar but different thing happening. This would be Genesis 8, starting in verse 6. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and he sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him anymore. So we see a very similar but noticeably different set of events. The noticeably different part is what I want to focus on. All too often we get caught up on the similarities here. So clearly, the Bible is drawing from this older epic. I agree with this entirely. However, what we need to focus on is where the stories get different. This will show us what the Bible is doing with the story. It's not just copying and pasting the story. Rather, it's writing, you might say, a parody of the story, or more accurately, a polemic against the Babylonian religion. So in the Babylonian story, we just have the different birds sent out for whatever reason. There might be some significance to each bird that I'm unaware of. The point is that in the story here in Genesis chapter 8, the Noah story, there is a significance to these birds. The first bird to send out is a raven. This is an unclean bird, and it flies off and never comes back. The dove, however, is a clean bird, and it flies off and returns with the olive leaf, a sign of peace, and it shows Noah that the flood has ended. What we're looking at here in the flood story is a story of decreation. So first we have creation, then over a period of time, man becomes sinful and destroys the world, and God now needs to decreate the world or uncreate the world so that he can recreate it and restore order. And there's a big theme in the early chapters of Genesis, which is bringing order out of chaos. And this is creation language from the ancient Near East. This is what the gods do. They take chaos and bring it to order. Creation isn't really about the material products that we might consider creation, the trees, the rocks, the mountains, the sky, the sun, etc. This isn't what these creation accounts are focused on. What they're focused on is a chaotic world and bringing order into that chaos. And whoever brings the order into the chaos is the God. He's the one that then controls that order. So here in the flood story, we see the order being turned into chaos because of the sin of man, and then being restored to order. So when Noah sends out the unclean raven, it flies off into the chaotic world, never to be seen again. This would be similar to the scapegoat in the Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement story that we'll read about in Leviticus. And this is how the sins are atoned for. They're put onto the sacrificial goat, but it is not killed. It is not sacrificed. It's sent into the wilderness, which is another symbol of chaos, like the flood. The dove, on the other hand, is the clean animal. It's the one that restores relationship with God, like the goat that is sacrificed on Yom Kippur. So this is taking the Babylonian story, but it's putting a Israelite spin on it, right? It's taking this and saying, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. This is how it works. And it's kind of a cool thing what's happening there. Now, this winds up being a theme. There are several of these Babylonian stories that make their way into Tanakh, or your Old Testament, and especially here in the beginning of the book of Genesis. So if we come back to creation, there's the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. And in this one, we similarly have a division of 6 in both of them, but in the Genesis creation story, we have 6 days of creation, whereas in the Enuma Elish, we have 6 gods of creation, or pairs of gods in some cases. So on day 1 in Genesis, we have the light is created and separated from dark, whereas in the Enuma Elish, we have Anshar and Kishar, who are the gods of the 2 semispheres, or the light and the darkness. On day 2, we have the water separated, whereas in the Babylonian story, we have Apsu and Tiamat, and these are the gods of the fresh and salt water. On day 3 in Genesis, we have the dry land appears, and in the Babylonian, in the Enuma Elish, you have Lamu and Lahamu, and they are the gods of the silt lands, or the fertile lands. In day 4, you have the heavens made. This equates to Anu, the god of the heavens. In day 5, you have the oceans made. This would be Enki, or Ea in Babylon. This is the god of the waters. And on day 6, mankind is created. This would be Marduk, the creator of man in the Babylonian epic. So the 6 days of creation parallel the 6 gods, or pairs of gods, in the Enuma Elish. So you see what's going on here is that Genesis 1 is taking these 6 things, not because these are historical events that happen in a certain order on certain days, rather to say that our God is the one God. So when in Genesis 1, it gets really interesting because we see God says, let us make man in our image. Any person familiar with the Babylonian creation epic might look at that and go, okay, yeah, the gods, yes, they come together. Let us make man in our image. However, when we go to the next verse, so God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. The word translated God is Elohim, which is a plural. So we still get this view of plurality, right? So Elohim created man in his image. In Hebrew, it should be both plural, but it's not. It could literally be read, the gods created man in his image. See, it doesn't work that way. It has to be God created man in his image. What this is telling us is that where the Babylonians view this creation as being done by multiple gods, here the God of Israel is saying, no, there's one God. But that God represents a plurality. That God represents all the forces. He is the force from which all these forces come. So if you're a Babylonian, you might be worshiping the sun. You might be you might be praying to the gods of the ocean for a safe travel. You might be praying to the gods of the silt lands for a good harvest, the gods of the heavens, the waters, or the creator of mankind. Whatever God you might be praying for, what Genesis 1 is saying is, it's one God. All of these forces, the sun, they would see as a force that helps them grow their plants and gives them light to do their work. They would see the fresh water, the rivers, this force that's bringing the water down to help them grow their crops, etc. They see all these forces as representing a different God. But in Genesis 1, we have them saying, no, yes, multiple forces, Elohim, but one source. God created man in his image. It is easy when you don't know this information to look at Genesis 1 and think that this is a historical recounting of exactly how God created. However, when you study the culture and what the people of that day would have known and been exposed to, it's much more likely to conclude that these are not historical stories. Why do we have 6 days of creation? To combat the 6 Babylonian gods involved in creation. So it's taking the narrative and writing a polemic against it, saying not this way, this way. And that seems to be the point of the first 11 chapters at the very least of Genesis. One could argue whether it stops there or not, but that's beyond the scope of this video. My point is this: if you already believe that God created everything in 6 days, that's fine. If that's an important thing to you. I used to be an atheist, and things like this are a big hang up to atheists or to skeptics who are looking at the stories, and clearly the scientific evidence is overwhelmingly against the flood narrative. Now, I know there's people that argue against this, but they cherry pick information and try to having drawn a conclusion, find a way to manipulate the scientific data to support their conclusion. If you just look at the data, the evidence is overwhelmingly against the flood story. And if you look at young earth creationism, the scientific evidence is overwhelmingly against it. But as it turns out, it doesn't even appear that this is what Genesis 1 is trying to teach, a young earth creation. It doesn't even seem to be interested in the creation of material matter. On one day, we have light created. To us, that is a material thing, but to them, it would not have been. On another day, we don't even have anything created. It's just water separated from water, dry land appearing, etc. So this story doesn't seem to be interested in material creation. Rather, it's interested in bringing order out of the chaos. That's what this story is attempting to tell. And the reason that it's structured in the way that it is structured is to be a polemic against the Babylonian gods. I'm Steve Perry. This is Biblical Anarchy, and my intention here in this series of videos I'm going to be doing is to present to skeptics or even atheists who are interested, who might potentially even want to believe in a God, but don't see any way to make it happen. My goal is to give you what I've learned by studying the culture, the archaeology, the history around these texts to the way that I interpret them today. Obviously, this might not work for you. I'm not saying it will. This is not an evangelical exercise. I am not trying to bring you, I personally am a Noahide. I'm not trying to bring you into the Noahide belief system. I'm simply trying to give you the information that might make a move to becoming a Noahide or a Jew or even a Christian a possibility for you once you see that some of these texts have been interpreted in our modern culture much differently than they would have been interpreted in the ancient culture. If you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, subscribe to the channel, but whatever you do, don't just sit there, do something.